Hi, folks. I'm JJ Apodaca. I'm really excited to be here to talk to you today about PARCAs, priority amphibian and reptile conservation areas. I've heard a lot of buzz about the native bee network and excited to impart some of the wisdom that's come from the PARCAs. Now, I know what you're thinking here. Who is this guy? And he's already used a buzz joke. Sorry, I'm just a turtle guy and I don't get to use that joke all that often, although I'm sure you guys hear it quite a bit. But anyway, I've been working on PARCAs for about 10 years and maybe a little bit longer actually, and have gone through a lot of the processes that I understand you all are getting ready to undertake in terms of prioritization areas and that sort of stuff. And so Casey asked me here today to talk about some of the things that we've learned during that process and how it can translate. So I think I'd like to start with just talking about why PARCAs for us, or why priority areas for you. And on our side for herps and obviously for invertebrates as well, I think it comes down to this idea, the overarching idea that important habitats for amphibians or reptiles or pollinators or bees or whatever it might be, that's not a cute fuzzy mammal, rarely receive sufficient attention from conservation agencies, organizations, NGOs, those sorts of things. And so it's really about trying to correct that in my mind. But from a more strategic level of why we're thinking about priority areas, I think it's really important to think that we need new and innovative ways to engage stakeholders with divergent priorities. And I love this quote from Buckminster Fuller, that you never change things by fighting the existing reality. And so, to change something, you build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete. And I think that's what priority areas do. They help us build a model that engages a whole array of different stakeholders around place. And I think that place-based conservation is really the important concept here. And on a broader, more like strategic conservation level, I'd also like to point out that priority areas, PARCAs in this case, for me, integrate really well into other conservation plans. So we can talk about the conservation of native bees, but that hits at a different level when you talk about that it aligns with swap priorities or, with recovery plan goals or those sorts of things. And so I think that's an important thing to be considering here as well. And again, that place-based approach, I think, is really important here. I can't hit on that enough, that you might not have people across the country who are interested in native bee conservation, but they might be interested in the same place that you were interested in for whatever reason. And I think that's an incredibly valuable tool. So our goals for PARCAs has been really multifaceted, right? Raise the profile of high priority species or areas. Again, you could be doing the same sort of thing for bees, increase public awareness. Obviously, that's a major goal and priority for a lot of us, and really to identify new or expanded areas where herp conservation or bee conservation could be used, and ultimately to increase funding. I also really like to think about, what are the impacts of what we're doing with priority areas. And I do a lot of work on hellbenders here in the East Coast of the United States. And I think of it like this: there's all these groups out there, land trusts, federal agencies, state agencies, NGOs, that are interested in doing conservation and are doing conservation on hellbenders. But if you spread that across the landscape, that effort really gets washed out and watered down. So by focusing that effort into a few key areas, we can really start to rebuild healthy metapopulations and help those spread across the landscape. And so to me, that's a very, very powerful sort of approach and message. I'll just talk about IBAs for a second as well, because we really took this IBA heavily from, or took this idea heavily from the idea of IBAs, or important bird areas. And I'm sure a lot of you have heard of IBAs, but most of you probably don't realize how wildly successful they've been. So if you're really interested in prioritization areas and you want a great model, go look at their website, go look at the success stories that they've had, and be inspired. And the other thing I'll mention here is that I love this quote from Frank Gill, the president of the past from the National Audubon Society, about IBAs, because it mimics or replicates a lot of what I've said here, which is that IBAs have the unique power to unite people, communities, and organization in proactive bird conservation, one place at a time. Just take out bird in there and IBAs and put in bees, and you see the strength of this place-based approach, and where you could be going. The other thing that I like to think about is that priority areas, for me, gives us this ability for our organization, for the Amphibian and Reptile Conservancy, to have a broad scale strategy, but to still do on the ground conservation. And I think for a lot of you that have been in conservation for a long time, or maybe even a short time, we pretty quickly realized that there's tons of broad strategies out there, broad scale, programs that don't get anything done because nothing is implemented at the local level. And vice versa. We see a lot of great restoration projects, for example, that make no impact because they're not aligned to a broader strategy. And what these priority areas do is give us the ability to be fractal, right? To have what's going on at the local level mimic what's going on at the larger level and make an impact, because it is part of a larger strategy, and that larger strategy can be implemented at the ground level. So just a bit about PARCAs here and how far we've gotten. So it's taken me about 12 years to identify half the states in the nation. This is going to each individual state, working with the local experts and identifying these PARCAs. One of the things that you'll notice right off the bat here is the size and scale of some of these, and that differs hugely from IBAs. IBAs are often really small, and that's, I guess, one of the first lessons that I'll mention here is that, for me, I think if you're going to identify priority areas, it needs to be large. It needs to be encompassing, so that you can pull in a lot of those partners. I think that's again the power of place-based conservation. But when you have a larger landscape, you have the ability to be bringing in different land trusts or local organizations or whoever it might be, and I think that's really powerful. We have gone past this and used this model to also start on the ground programs, which hopefully you all will get to at some point, where you can combine that approach to be doing really broad projects, encompassing a lot of different factors, and also bringing in a whole bunch of partners and funding sources. So please reach out to me if you have any questions about that, because I'm really passionate about that. Okay, lessons learned here. I think there's three main areas that I'll hit on. The first one is sort of identifying what regional scale you're going to look at. For us in ARC, and for the PARC network, the Partners in Amphibians Reptile Conservation Network, we've had a lot of success at identifying regional networks that have some level of biological reality, also some level of governmental reality that align somewhat with Forest Service regions or Fish and Wildlife Service regions, but that also have flexibility, that go sort of over, and people can sort of on the borders choose where they're going to go. I'll also say that when you're identifying areas, it's really important to develop products, develop data products and goals and strategies, and go into meetings, but ultimately to let local practitioners you know, take the lead in identifying and crafting those polygons and moving that side forward. I think that's really, really important. You want to have the data products to keep it somewhat equitable across the country, but also to let the people who are going to be doing the work and on the ground to be making the last decisions. And the last sort of thing I'll say is that, and this is maybe the most important in my mind, is that while you're identifying these priority areas and you have the experts in the room or the people working on that, I can't emphasize enough how important it is to, at that time, create a roadmap. And this is just the term I use, but for every PARCA that we've identified, we've gone through and created a document at that time that had the threats, the opportunities, the best management practices, the conservation needs, the conservation recommendations, partners, all those things, because that is the way to implement this work on the ground, is having a document that tells you exactly what needs to be done, that a lot of people can tap into really quickly, and that'll always give you some sort of guidance. All right, well, thank you so much. Please feel free to reach out with any questions or comments, and I'll also be around in the meeting.